Hey everyone, me Kevin here. In this video, I'm going to provide a complete breakdown of where we stand in stimulus negotiations for November 2020 and the options that we have going forward. We'll start with where we stand today, then we'll hit the options and the likely paths forward. Just remember though, if you are watching this in November, make sure to take advantage of the Black Friday month code down below. Pricing will change after that for the amazing programs on building wealth and getting out of this cycle of having to rely on this dysfunctional government. You'll learn about stocks, real estate, or making money from YouTube videos. Check those out down below. And you can always email me for a bundle coupon at kevin@meetkevin.com. Okay, let's get started. First, it's important to realize that stimulus is going to be heavily predicated on when we actually get bailed out as a society by a vaccine. The reality is the first doses of either the Pfizer or Moderna or even the AstraZeneca vaccine, even Johnson & Johnson, heck, we could have 4 to 5 different vaccines. Reality is the first doses will not be available for healthcare professionals and first responders until December 8th through December 15th. A second round of, or second batch of doses for seniors and those at risk might be available in late December, but more likely they'll be available in early 2021. This means vaccinations between January and March. And mass vaccine availability for anybody who wants a vaccine probably won't be available until April to September of 2021. This means we will still need stimulus and COVID relief to help our society get from where we stand now in November in 2020 to mass inoculation, if you're even willing to take the vaccine. And the reality is there's absolutely no one suggesting that stimulus is not needed right now. It's clear that our small businesses need help. It's clear that working families need help. It's clear that restaurants and airlines need help. The reality is you have every economist that talks on this subject saying the government needs to do more, that the Federal Reserve has already done everything that they can via monetary support, but the government needs to step in and do their part via fiscal support, aka providing money directly to the people who are injured by this pandemic through no fault of their own. On top of this, we're also currently facing multiple fiscal and budgetary cliffs where our government could shut down or more people could be desperately injured by Congress's failure to act. On December 11th, the United States government budget comes to an end. This means we face another government shutdown. Currently, Republicans and Democrats are negotiating an omnibus spending bill. This is basically a bundle of 12 bills tied together called a group package, aka omnibus spending bill, that keeps the government funded for the 2021 fiscal year, which ends September 30th, 2021. The last ending of September 30th in 2020, we passed something known as a continuing resolution to sort of kick the can down the road to December 11th. And so that's where we stand now. Lawmakers say they want a real package and not another kick the can down the road package. Now, the current budget only allows for a $5 billion overage for non-defense spending. Unfortunately, Republicans want $12.5 billion of extra VA spending for Veterans Affairs to be counted as this non-defense budget, or towards this non-defense budget. This means cutting another $7.5 billion elsewhere, and Democrats want this $12.5 billion placed into the emergency category. In other words, we're already facing a fight over $7.5 billion. And yet, on the other hand, we're facing a fight over potentially $2 trillion in stimulus, yet we can't even solve $7.5 billion when our government is about to shut down on December 11th. And if the government shuts down again, 1 million additional people will file for unemployment as their government jobs get canned. In addition to this, on December 31st, we face the end of the CARES Act programs with the Federal Reserve. This, ironically, is actually a good thing. I made a detailed video on this. You can actually just Google that or typing into YouTube, Meet Kevin Treasury Bailout Ends, and there is a full detailed video explaining why this $454 billion going from the Fed back to the Treasury Department is actually good for getting an additional stimulus measure. Jerome Powell over at the Federal Reserve has already said he is working on providing or sending this $454 billion back to the Treasury Department. This will be good for smoothing over conversations with stimulus talks. Unemployment comes to an end approximately December 26th. This is literally the day after Christmas. Unemployment checks will end. 39 weeks of unemployment for regular unemployment from the beginning of this pandemic in March and in December. Self-employed people receiving unemployment ends in December. We literally go from having some state unemployment support to having zero unemployment support for the people who have been hit the hardest during this pandemic. And remember, the people who have been hit the hardest are women and minorities and those making under $40,000 a year. And all three of those are disproportionately represented in retail, hospitality, and restaurants. These are the areas that are getting hit the most, obviously including travel. Student loan deferrals end December 31st. We currently have a freeze on student loan payments, fees, and interest through December 31st. This ends, and students will have to begin making their payments again. This is despite the fact that millions of students are back home, and they're not able to work. They're not even able to go to school. They've got all this student debt, and they couldn't even go to school for the last 9 months. The CDC's eviction protections end December 31st. This is for people who make less than $99,000 per year as a single person or $198,000 as a married couple. They are eligible for CDC eviction protections if they follow certain requirements, but in general, they're eligible for eviction protections. Those end December 31st. Without a renewal of this or some form of stimulus package or rental relief bailout, we will probably face an eviction crisis in January, as evictions can currently be filed in anticipation of this January 1st deadline. In other words, people can file evictions in the month of December. Tenants would have to go to court to defend themselves in the month of December. And if they lose and a judge says you're getting evicted, the sheriff can show up on probably January 2nd. Sad reality that we're facing now. President Trump has mostly delegated stimulus talks to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is in favor of a smaller, more targeted stimulus package in the range of $600 to $1.1 trillion, $600 billion to $1.1 trillion. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell this Friday held a meeting to discuss a strategy for how to negotiate with Democrats. He met with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows, by the way, had COVID. He has since recovered. The House has currently flipped 12 seats in favor of Republicans. Republicans say they only need 4 to 5 more seats to have a majority in the House to be able to dethrone Nancy Pelosi. On the House of Representatives, the Republicans have flipped 12 seats from Democratic seats to Republican seats. There are 4 elections that are still up in the air, but either way, Republicans would need a 218-seat majority to be able to dethrone Nancy Pelosi. That's probably not going to happen in 2020 or 2021. Instead, Republicans believe that they can take control of the House in 2022. This means if Joe Biden becomes president and wants to do stimulus or tax reform or anything, he needs to get it done within the first 2 years if it is true that Republicans are destined to take over the House in 2022. Kevin McCarthy, who is the minority leader in the House, says Nancy Pelosi says that doing nothing is better than doing something. And Kevin McCarthy says we're ready to send money to small businesses now via a Paycheck Protection Program bill. Nancy Pelosi counters this and says this is not fair. It's not fair to provide relief to businesses while leaving people hungry, letting states and cities lay off police and firefighters, and not providing relief to American families a la stimulus checks. The reality is all of these things are needed. Nancy Pelosi is a proponent of PPP funding, but she makes the argument that if she gives PPP funding now, she will lose her leverage to get relief for state and local governments, American families, and those who are hungry. Joe Biden demands the following immediately: relief for individuals, unemployed, small businesses, and for renters. He also wants to see relief for homeowners, despite mortgage forbearance still being a possibility. Joe Biden mentions this. Which, speaking about possibilities, remember that you still have the possibility of getting 4 free stocks with Webull. If you deposit just $100 with Webull, they will give you 4 entirely free stocks. You could also get life insurance in as little as 5 minutes via the link down below. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can Apple Pay, Android Pay for it. It's super easy to do. Lauren and I both have it, and we pay for it monthly and automatically. We don't even have to think about it. Potential student loan forgiveness via Joe Biden. Joe Biden currently argues for approximately a $10,000 relief or reduction in debt owed for student loans. Some in the Democratic Party suggest that all student loan debt or $50,000 of student loan debt should be forgiven. This is leaving a lot of people wondering, hey, should I wait to pay off my student loans and kind of just wait to see what happens? The answer at this point is probably, yeah, keep taking your deferral until the end of the year and wait and see what happens. Tax changes. It's unlikely that we're going to see any kind of tax changes from the Biden administration in 2021. If anything, if Democrats maintain control or get as much control as they can, which we'll talk about that in a moment regarding Georgia, it's likely that this would be a beginning of 2022 policy initiative for Democrats and Biden to tackle any kind of tax policy changes. This is because right now the focus for Joe Biden appears to be getting the economy back on proper footing. Now, let's talk about the 4 stimulus packages that we have, and then we'll see some of the differences between them, and then we could talk about paths forward. So again, first, we're going to start with the 4 stimulus packages that currently exist. The most popular, and the one that is most talked about, and the one that Joe Biden supports, is the HEROES Act. This is heavily supported by Democrats. It is a $2.2 to $2.4 trillion bill. Everything that is in red is something that is contested. Democrats want to see $600 per week for unemployment. Republicans see this as a disincentive to go to work. This is despite economists and professionals suggesting, no, there might seem like there's a disincentive, but the reality is people might not have a choice. And so it is better to over-support than under-support and let people suffer. $1,200 stimulus checks with $500 for dependents of all ages. This is a contested item because it includes stimulus checks to undocumented workers who have an ITIN number and who could potentially pay taxes. $21 billion to homeowners. In green, I'm putting things that seem to have bipartisan agreement. So basically, the more red you see, the less likely the package is of happening. The more green you see, the more likely it is of happening. And blue is sort of neutral stuff. $417 billion for state and local government aid. Republicans are only willing to provide $300 billion of state and local government aid. They see anything above $300 billion as creating a slush fund for Democrats to waste money. However, Democrats say, look, the pandemic's not over yet. We may have $300 billion in costs that we have to, get out of the hole of, but we still are in a pandemic, so we need money going forward. The HEROES Act would provide $249 billion for Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, $13.7 billion to the CDC, $120 billion for child care services, especially poverty and social services for children. This is actually a big line item right here, and this is one of the items, I hate to say it, this is just one of the items that Republicans view as a liberal wish list. It's sad to see that in some of these cases because we're holding up all of these packages because of certain, minor portions. But I also understand there are a lot of people in poverty, and honestly, in my opinion, poverty should not exist in America. But it does. And we're on top of this pandemic, people in poverty are suffering even more. They also have higher instances of actually contracting COVID because they live in smaller spaces, even to the point where people in poverty are more likely to shop at stores that are smaller than wealthier people. Therefore, people shopping in smaller stores are more likely to catch COVID than people going to shop at the big grocery stores. Yeah. Research shows all of this. $208 billion for schools. I put this in orange because the amount here is contested. Republicans prefer closer to $105 to $130 billion. $50 billion to EIDL grants. Those are those small business grants we saw, the $1,000 per employee. $13.5 billion for airports, $750 million for the World Food Program. Republicans aren't liking the addition of a lot of these sort of extra things that they see. $2.4 billion to Amtrak, $11 billion for tribal relief and Indian reservations. This is important. All of this is earmarked for COVID. And look, there's really no difference between state and local relief and tribal relief. I mean, they are people as well that live in America, so this is important as well. $22 billion for health and human health services and substance abuse. A lot of this is actually coming out of the lockdowns, depression and anxiety and psychology and the therapy services that would be included in this section. $125 billion for reimbursing and supporting contact tracing and other expenses. When you get sort of these other expense lines, that's something that sort of raises the eyebrows of Republicans as well. PPP round 2 is generally accepted on both sides. This right here is considered a poison pill for Republicans. Ending the cap. This should really say the cap. Ending the cap on state and local government tax deductions. Republicans see this as a, blue state, high income tax state bailout or tax break for wealthy Democrats. $12 billion for broadband access. Does not include liability protections for Republicans, though, which Republicans see as a poison pill. The next bill that we have, or proposal, this one's a proposal. This one's not even a bill yet. It's a Problem Solvers Caucus proposal. $1.523 trillion with a $400 billion booster or $200 billion reducer, which is kind of cool because it has sort of what are known as those economic stabilizers, depending on how bad COVID gets. Actually includes 2 rounds of stimulus checks. I put it in yellow because it's not clear that Republicans would not go for that, especially since this is something that was put together by 24 Democrats and 24 Republicans. So you do have that element of bipartisanship happening here. Money for a PPP round 2, both agree with that. $50 billion for the EIDL, $450 a week for unemployment. This is better than $600 in the eyes of Republicans. Creates less of a disincentive. $50 billion in employer credits. $25 billion in rental assistance. There is food aid in here. $25 billion to agriculture. $500 billion for state and local governments, but minus $130 billion if COVID improves, which could take it down to $370 billion. That's closer to what Republicans are looking for, so that's better. Liability protections with worker protections. That's good. Democrats don't want blanket liability protections for companies. They also want to see worker protections, and they even want to go as far as saying consumer protections as well. $130 billion for schools. I do think Democrats would end up going for that. $100 billion for COVID testing, support, treatment, and so on and so forth. That's the Problem Solvers Caucus proposal. Notice there's no red in that. That is probably the most in the middle bill or proposal, and it's the best one that exists just because, look, it provides 2 stimulus checks, provides the rental relief, and it provides funding for so many things that are needed. Now, it doesn't include some specifics that we have over here. There are a lot more specifics in the HEROES Act. But then again, it's almost $900 billion smaller. So, obviously funding for things like Amtrak and broadband would probably still be something that would need to be discussed. The HEALS Act, and that could always be negotiated as well. The HEALS Act is $1.1 trillion. This is a Republican-led bill. $300 per week in unemployment. So you can see the more we get to the Republican side, the less money we get per week in unemployment. Republicans are generally focused on $300 per week. Liability protections, but they do not mention worker or consumer protections, and that's a poison pill for Democrats. $105 billion for schools, $1,200 stimulus checks. All of these offers, by the way, offer $500 to dependents as well of all ages. PPP round 2. New tax credits, SBA 7A loan, a new one, money for an FBI building. This really pisses off Democrats. There's too little food aid and there's no rental aid and no housing aid in here. Something else that Democrats call emaciated, or basically way too small of a bill, which the skinny bill, which is even smaller than the HEALS Act, doesn't help either. It doesn't include stimulus checks. It doesn't include rental aid. It doesn't include housing aid. Doesn't include food aid. Doesn't include worker or consumer protections. This one's really seen by Democrats as totally dead on arrival and almost tone deaf. $300 per week, $105 billion for schools, liability protections, PPP round 2, some money for testing and public health, and $20 billion for the USDA and agricultural departments. But again, also misses a lot of the food aid benefits, rental aid, housing aid, a lot of the things that Democrats are really clamoring for. So those are sort of the 4 packages in terms of where things stand now. Obviously, the Problem Solvers Caucus proposal seems to be the most interesting and the most desirable, especially to both sides. Nancy Pelosi rejects that package, though, because she actually, quote, when she heard about it, says, "That's nice, but we're not going to do that." That was her line. And this is mostly because Nancy Pelosi is looking for this larger HEROES Act proposal to get something extremely thorough done. And of course, Republicans use her hardlining to suggest that, well, she's just looking to sort of pad the lines of all of those little poison pills. Basically these red things, right? We got those tax cuts in here. Broadband, look, it's needed, but it's a very big Democratic priority. It makes sense that during COVID and social distancing and people staying at home, we should have better broadband, especially in rural areas. Money going to the World Food Program. These particular programs here, $120 billion for childcare for people in poverty. Like, it sounds like something we should all be behind. But a lot of Republicans say, hey, look, we don't have the money to spend on this. So it's tough, and that's politics. It's really tough. So now let's jump on over to the likely paths forward and the chances for these various different paths. Standalone measures are something that Republicans are huge proponents of. I personally believe a standalone measure only has about a 5% chance of actually happening. Democrats just vehemently refuse any kind of standalone measures. Stimulus prior to December 31st. I see this as having a 30% chance. There is a huge appetite for getting something done prior to December 31st, so maybe this is really a lot, larger. But my expectation is this would have to be a new proposal. It would not be the HEROES Act, because that would look like Democrats won, and it would not be the HEALS Act or the skinny bill, because that would make it look like Republicans won. Instead, we'd probably have to have something new and in the middle, maybe like that Problem Solvers Caucus proposal. But then again, we only have 3 working weeks left. That's it. 3 working weeks left after Thanksgiving to get a bill and bill terms agreed on, to get the bill written, to get the bill passed, and to get it signed into law. If it gets signed into law, look, if we get a stimulus package signed into law by December 11th, we could have stimulus checks by Christmas. So that is possible. The money could flow pretty quickly. My estimation is that we would have to likely see a compromise by the end of the year be somewhere between $1.4 and $1.9 trillion. I think Democrats would really have to come down on the larger number to be able to avert some of these cliffs coming up in December. This would also require Trump's agreement. It doesn't seem like Trump is terribly opposed to getting stimulus done. He was extremely supportive of doing stimulus prior to the election, and even after the election, he's tweeted, "Get stimulus done now. Needs to be smaller and more targeted, but we need support from both sides." There have been some advisors close to Trump saying he's not interested in signing a massive spending bill prior to leaving office. He thinks that this might damage his legacy, so to speak, because it's almost like he's setting up the country for having that much more debt right before he leaves office. If he leaves office, right? It's all a big if right now. Obviously, that is a topic for a totally different video. But let's continue on here. If we do not get something done by December 31st, we're going to see a lot of damage from crossing these fiscal cliffs. A lot of damage. It's not going to be very good. So there is the possibility of having a compromise due to this damage prior to January 20th, which is Inauguration Day, and after December 31st. But I actually put this at closer to a 15% chance, because in January, we're going to have a lot of things happening. First, the new Congress takes over, so you have the newly elected people. They start their session, and most people are going to want to wait to see who ends up taking control of the Senate. That happens on January 5th. If Democrats win both seats in Georgia on January 5th, you could assume we're probably going to see a pretty fat stimulus package. It could be over $2 trillion. It could be as high as $3 trillion, because Democrats will have complete control then. Not over everything. Even with a 50-50 split in the Senate, Democrats will not be able to plow through anything that they want, but they will have substantially more leverage in negotiations. Generally, bills require 60 votes to pass in the Senate. However, with a 50-50 tie in the Senate, Democrats would have power over new tax policies, appointing cabinet members or confirming cabinet members, confirming judges. And that could give them a lot of leverage with Republicans to get a much larger stimulus package done. If Democrats lose the 1 seat in Georgia on January 5th, then assume we're going to see under a $2 trillion package. And again, it's very likely that Congress will end up waiting until January 20th to get something done, because realistically, there are only going to be 2 working weeks between January 5th and Inauguration Day. And it's unlikely that in that little window of time there, something's going to get done. Now, the odds of having stimulus after January 20th, I put it the largest percentage here, 50%. And so if Democrats sweep and they do get that control in the Senate, I would expect to see that $2.4 to $3 trillion stimulus package. And if Republicans hold the Senate, I would expect to see a smaller package, some form of a compromise, that 1.4 to 1.9, which honestly, if we just go over here, we should really just do the 1.4 to 1.9 over here. And if Democrats take control, fine, then do more after. But just compromise now and get something done. That's my belief. I think, we have been dealing with this pandemic for long enough, but this is an overview of exactly what's going on with stimulus negotiations. Just sticking to the facts, and then obviously I made it clear which parts are my guesstimations or opinions. And golly, hopefully we get something by the end of the year as soon as possible, because there are some nasty cliffs coming up. In the meantime, though, get your life insurance, get your 4 free stocks with Webull when you deposit $100, and of course, check out the coupons down below for the amazing courses. Thanks so much for watching, consider sharing, and folks, we'll see you next time.